Good morning.
Good morning, Michelle.
Thank you so much. I am so delighted to be here. It is particularly special for me to be here at the Women's World Congress, and I'm so grateful to Dr. Patia for providing me with this opportunity to join you all. As Nina mentioned, I have the unique privilege in life to be married to a wonderful man who is also my business partner, Dr. Dennis Reina. And this year, Dennis and I are celebrating 25 years of marriage. Thank you. And 25 years of dedicated research and practice to the development of a construct that helps us to build trust in our relationships with one another. And over the last 25 years, in my opportunity to work with organizations all over the world, I have experienced an unfolding pattern again and again and again. And that is my interactions with women and my experiences with women at all levels of responsibility within organizations. And what I have heard and what I have discovered is that we as women have a bit of a unique perspective around trust. And what I mean by the unique perspective is we find ourselves, I find women, a bit more tuned in to some of the innate vulnerabilities of trust and the impact those innate vulnerabilities can have. So, as an example, imagine that you are in a room with a group of colleagues and you're the project lead and you've assembled this team to provide them with an update on this project. You ask for clarifying questions and you ask for any points that need to be further explored. There are a few questions, there are a few comments, and everybody nods in return. You get up and you walk out of the meeting and you're pumped up. You feel excited because you feel as though everybody is aligned. Until later on in the afternoon, you're walking down the hall with a colleague and you discover there are issues. There are concerns. People are talking about them. They're just not talking about them with you. You've been delegated to lead a major initiative in your organization. You are honored by the opportunity this provides to you. You roll up your sleeves and you begin to dig in. And within a few weeks, all of a sudden, you feel your boss hovering over your shoulders and you discover that you are being micromanaged. You are in the process of wrapping up a very significant piece of work. You've got a huge report that is due. And to wrap up and deliver this report, you need critical information from a colleague. You've reached out to them multiple times, you've sent multiple emails, you've reminded them in meetings, you left voicemail messages, and you still don't have that information. You find yourself up against a wall. The report is due, and you're unable to complete it. These are a few examples that people have experienced that cause trust to be vulnerable. Do these resonate with you? When you're on the receiving end of these kinds of experiences, what impact does that have on you and others? Thank you. What impact does that have when we're on the receiving end of those kinds of behaviors? What do you find? Yes.
You start to blame yourself.
Yes, we start to blame ourselves. What else? What other impact does that have?
It depresses you.
Yes, it can take us down. And another, when we're on the receiving end, what other way might that impact us? Feeling intimidated. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And when we're in those experiences, we can find ourselves all of a sudden feeling, we're intimidated and we feel a little bit shaky. We can start, an inner voice goes off inside of ourselves and we wonder, oh my God, what on earth is going on? We feel it viscerally within us, don't we? We may feel an uneasiness in our stomach. We may feel a quiver going down our arms. Some of us might actually begin to get a headache. We might feel tense and strained within ourselves. Our equilibrium is off. It's like the ground is moving underneath us. And we can't quite figure out, what is this thing? Well, what I want to offer to you is that there is a word, there is a language that can help us to identify what this thing is. And that thing is betrayal. It's in those moments and in those times when we actually may feel betrayed. Now, I want to acknowledge that I've just used a big word. The word betrayal is a big word. And we often associate it with big things. Have you ever been lied to? Have you ever been sabotaged? Have you ever felt your efforts undermined? Have you ever felt your good graces being taken advantage of? I think we all have in some way, shape, or form. And those are ways in which we may feel betrayed. But most often, the breach of trust can be a little bit more subtle in nature, and it can sort of creep up on us when we least expect it. I'd like to share a story with you that illustrates the point I'm making, and it's a story about a wonderful leader named Susan. Susan worked for a very large, world-renowned research institution. She went to work for this organization shortly after college, and over a period of time, she continued to prove herself, and over the years, increased in responsibility, and she worked her way up to a director-level position. Susan was extremely committed to her organization and had an enormous sense of pride for their purpose in the world. And she was very dedicated to supporting her organization to honor this purpose. I had an opportunity to meet Susan when her organization hired our firm to help her lead a major change process based on a foundation of trust. Susan was asked to lead a very large real estate development project for her organization, and you can just imagine how excited she was. It was a huge project. It required additional responsibility, but it was an expanded opportunity for her to make a difference and for her team to further provide value to her organization. So she went to work immediately. She assembled a team. She got all the key players in place. They developed milestones, timelines, divvied up roles and responsibilities and tasks, and they went to work. Shortly thereafter, as they got into the project, her boss, Catherine, asked her to provide a briefing on the status of the project. Well, there was a gentleman named Ken that Susan had invited to be a part of the team. She didn't know Ken well. She didn't have a lot of experience working with Ken, but she had admired him from a distance in his skills and his abilities and his subject matter expertise. So she was excited to have him on this project team and to have an opportunity to work with him. When Catherine asked Susan to deliver a briefing, Susan invited Ken to go with her. She thought it would be an opportunity for Ken to become acquainted with the big boss, if you will, and it gave them another opportunity to collaborate with one another. The day of the meeting arrived. Susan arrived at Catherine's office. She was excited and ready to go. She walked in and greeted Catherine. Catherine stood to greet Susan and then reached behind her to shut the door of the office. Susan quickly reminded Catherine that Ken was coming and he should be here any moment. Catherine looked at Susan and said, "Susan, Ken will not be coming, and we need to talk." Instantly, in that moment, I'm seeing the nods of the head. Susan had this visceral feeling something was off. It's 6 o'clock Friday evening. I'm in my office wrapping up some loose ends, and the phone rings, and it's Susan. And I immediately recognize that quality of voice, that tone. You know that tone when we've just had a good, hard cry? We recognize that quality of voice. Susan proceeded to tell me that Ken had visited Catherine earlier in the day to let Catherine know that he did not believe Susan was the one for the job. He didn't quite think Susan had the experience that was necessary to lead this project. And he asked to be removed from the team. So in that moment, imagine what Susan might have been saying to me. Oh my God, how could he have done this to me? How could I have not seen this coming? How could I have been so stupid? How could I have been so blind? Can you see where Susan is going here in this moment? Can you see how she's beginning to turn inward on herself? This is what happens when our trust has been broken. We begin to turn inward, and we begin to question and doubt ourselves. Susan proceeded to share with me, I thought that I was the one for this job. I thought I had what it took. But maybe I don't. What was I thinking? Maybe, just maybe, he was right. Maybe I'm not the one for this job. Does this sound familiar? Do you resonate with this inner experience we have when that rug has been pulled out from underneath of us? Over our years of research, Dennis and I have found that the majority of the breaches of trust come often not just by what is done, but also by what is not done. Susan had checked in with Ken on multiple occasions to see how things were going. How were they doing? How was it for him to be a member of the team? And each and every time she checked in with him, he withheld his true concerns. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation where perhaps there was a meeting that you were not invited to that robbed you of an opportunity to become involved? Or perhaps there was a decision that was going to impact your work and you didn't have an opportunity to be a part of that decision. Or perhaps have you ever been the subject of people talking about you behind your back in one way, shape, or form? Or maybe you can relate to a woman named Maria's experience. Maria worked for the CFO of her organization. And one day he reached out to her and he asked her to work with him in preparing a presentation that would go to the CEO of this Fortune 200 financial services organization. Well, Maria was thrilled by this opportunity. Her boss let her know it was a really big piece of work. It was going to take a significant amount of time, but it would give her exposure, and it was an opportunity for her to stretch and to grow. Well, she seized that moment. She had to work very hard to take deeply complex issues and information and distill it into simple terms that could be readily and easily accessible. She cleared her deck. She worked several late nights. She had to work through some weekends, which caused her to navigate and negotiate commitments with her family, her husband, and her children. Well, she was further thrilled when her boss actually invited her to the meeting when they were going to be delivering this presentation to the CEO. So she felt further acknowledged, and she was a little nervous. She was going to go in to meet with this gentleman that she had not met with before. So Maria goes into this meeting with her boss. Her boss delivers the presentation, and Maria was sitting there, and her heart started racing when the CEO praised the quality of her work, praised the quality of the presentation, asked for a single solitary revision to be made. And then her heart plummeted to the ground when her boss sat there and took full credit for her work. He did not acknowledge her efforts in any way, shape, or form. I think many of us have had those kinds of experiences when our efforts have been taken advantage of, when our trust has been breached. And when we are in those spaces where our trust has been breached, it's within our nature, isn't it, to extend grace. It's within our nature to extend the benefit of the doubt. It's within our nature to give a second chance, maybe even a third chance. But when this continues, we can begin to feel uneasy. And we begin to lose our equilibrium, and we can begin to question and doubt ourselves. As the pattern creeps up, it can cause us to begin to lose sight of who we are and what it is that we have to offer. The vast majority of the breaches of trust are unintentional. Yet the impact is the same. The impact is the same. And because trust is so core and so innate within us and represents a very deep human need we have for connection with others, we want to protect it, don't we? We want to preserve and we want to protect that precious commodity called trust. I do as well. I've been where Maria has been. I've been where Susan has been. I've had that rug pulled out from underneath of me where I questioned and doubted myself. Good morning. And I think we all have been. So what do we do when we're in that space and we've lost our equilibrium? What do we do? The first step is we must pay attention. We must pay attention. Listen to our inner guts. Pay attention to our feelings and our emotions and our sensations. We must acknowledge to ourselves that there is this pattern, that these small things do matter. Taken singularly, in and of themselves, they may seem insignificant. But when they occur over and over and become a pattern, the impact certainly isn't insignificant. So the first step we take is to acknowledge there's something going on here. We must pay attention to it and give voice to it. The second is we pay attention to our feelings. We acknowledge them to ourselves. We give ourselves permission to acknowledge them to ourselves. When my trust has been broken, I can feel uneasy. How do you feel? What feelings and emotions do you sense within yourself when your trust has been broken? How do you feel?
Sad.
You feel sad? Yeah. How do you feel?
Sometimes a bit angry.
Sometimes a bit angry, absolutely. And how do you feel?
I feel like quitting and leaving the job and taking something else.
Have you all been there as well? You might want to just pick up and go somewhere else. And how do you feel when your trust has been broken?
Down, pretty
You
down.
feel down?
Deep down.
Yep, down. And for you, how do you feel when your trust has been broken?
You feel very let down?
Feel very let down. Good morning. And for you, how do you feel when your trust has been broken?
Disappointed, of course.
Disappointed. So yes, when our trust has been broken, we feel all of these feelings and emotions. We may feel let down. We may feel disappointed. We may feel angry. We may feel insecure. And we may also begin to question who we are and what we have to offer. It is in that moment when we are beginning to think that perhaps we should go somewhere else, that this isn't the place for me, that maybe this isn't where I actually belong. It is in that moment that we actually do have a choice. We can choose to allow that experience to define who we are and to rob us of the truth within ourselves, or we can choose a different path. And in choosing that different path, the first step is to take an inner stance and to say, this is not me. This pattern of behavior in these actions of others that cause trust to be so vulnerable, this is not me. And to take that inner stance that says, I do not deserve to be treated in this way. And in those moments where we may be questioning our own skills and our own capabilities, we move into that inner stance and we remember the truth of who we are. The key to us shifting from our own doubt and our own insecurity and our own vulnerability, the key is we must reach out and get support. Susan picked up the phone and she made a call. With the benefit of support, we're able to gain some perspective. We all need a place to go. We all need somebody to talk with. I would imagine that each and every person in this room has had an experience of the breach of trust. I believe we all have. And I believe we all have a need to talk about that experience. When we reach out for support with the spirit and intent of gaining understanding, we are able to gain perspective over what has occurred. And as we gain perspective, we are able to return to the inner truth within ourselves. Susan remembered who she was. She remembered, by golly, she did have skills. She did have knowledge. She did have a proven track record. And this was her project. She took an inner stance that nothing was going to take this away from her. She stepped in and she forged ahead. She delivered that project successfully and has continued to deliver many more projects through the life of her experience within her organization. So I'd like to take a moment and give you an opportunity to just explore some of these options for yourself. I'd like you to take a moment and turn to a partner at your table and just talk for a couple of moments about, at this time in your life, when you consider the circumference of relationships around you, when you are in a space of feeling hurt or disappointed, or your trust has been made vulnerable, where can you go for support? Where can you go for support? Please take a moment and turn to your partner and talk about that, please. Okay, I'd love to hear from a couple of people. What are some examples of where you can go for support? What's an example of where you can go?
We were just discussing, first of all, we will go to a quiet place to think, absorb.
Yes.
And then if we have a friend at workplace to discuss, those things, who can suggest and support in such situations. So we would do that.
Wonderful. I love this. So in this response, there's two levels of support. Yes, thank you. Let's acknowledge. There's two levels of support. I so appreciate this. Thank you so much. The one is, how do we support ourselves? How do we support ourselves? We take a moment and we go someplace quiet. For me, I love to go to nature. I may go for a walk. I may go sit under a tree, or I may move my body or go for a swim. But we may first go to a place to support ourselves. And then we consider, who can we go to and talk? Me, I need to talk. But we go to a person who can help us have some objectivity, correct? We don't want to go to a person who's going to take us on a downward spiral. We need support to help us regain some perspective. Where's an example of another place where you can go for support? We support within ourselves. We may go to a friend. Where else may we go for support?
Go to the house of God. You reflect and go to the house of God.
Yes. We may reflect and go to the house of God. Absolutely. Now, the next place I'd like you to go is when we're in that spot of vulnerability, when our trust has been broken, as we've explored, the greatest risk is we can doubt ourselves. And if we allow it, it can have a big hold on us. And we may forget who we are. Susan took inventory. She remembered these key things about herself that nobody, and I mean nobody, can ever take away from her. I'd like you to turn back to a partner, and I'd like you to take a moment, and I'd like you to talk with your partner about what are two truths about you. Two truths about you that nobody, and I mean nobody, can take those away from you. Please turn to your partner and talk for a moment. Okay. I so appreciate the sharing as we can learn from one another, so I'd love to hear from a couple of people if you'd be so kind. What's an example of something that you have within yourself that nobody can ever take away from you?
Who you are, what you are.
They can,
They cannot take it away. And the second is the goal that you have.
yes.
Those are the two things I feel.
They cannot take away the truth of who you are and the goals that you have. What might be another example? Thank you so much, and I believe that is. What's another that they cannot ever take away from you? Do we have an example over here that somebody would be willing to share? I'm coming.
I was thinking about sort of two levels with this. I guess my education, you know, sort of I've done that, I've earned that, but it's, you know, that's for everyone, I suppose.
Yes.
But also optimism, you know, can
thank
be
you.
quite sensitive, but also being resilient and bouncing back.
Thank you. Did everybody hear this? Wonderful. Thank you so much. The optimism and the resiliency in bouncing back. And I so appreciate these comments and these inner wisdoms because, ladies and gentlemen, betrayal can have a permanent impact on us if and only if we allow it to. But when we choose to embrace what has happened and we shift our focus from what has been done to me and how could they do that to me, and we step into and we navigate and we acknowledge and we allow our feelings to surface, not to get lost in them, but to use our feelings and emotions as a stepping stone to look for what we can learn and discover through this opportunity, what deeper truths about us within us we can navigate. We do not lose who we are. We do, however, deepen who we are. And when we step into that inner journey and we allow ourselves to be supported, those experiences, when our trust has been breached, can be one of our greatest sources of inner wisdom and can be a significant gift that we will always be grateful for. Because in the end, we have a deeper sense of who we are. And in that deeper sense of who we are, we have more to give to our relationships with others in service to the highest, best interest of trust. Thank you so much for the pleasure to be here and the honor to be with you today.